Hello, folks, and happy Thursday. I'm Esther Emery. I'm the homestead wife from the DIY channel Vouchamatic Off-Grid. But today you're on my personal channel, and I'm sitting down today. So maybe you should be sitting down too. I'm just going to tell a story. If you entertain yourself while listening to my stories by doing any kind of art, please do share it with me. Someone posted on Instagram a sketch done while listening to one of these talks, and it just completely made my day. It was the best part of my day. So find me on Instagram or whatever other social networking you enjoy, and do share your work with me. It's such a joy to share creativity and interests and artistic passions with one another. So I really appreciate that. Today I am going to talk about my off-grid life and some lessons that I have learned from life without electricity. This is not a choice that I necessarily can justify. People sometimes say that homesteading is better done with electricity, and it's not necessarily defensible to make the choice to do it without, in terms of pursuing self-sufficiency or efficiency. I don't necessarily disagree with that. For us, being off-grid has been a matter of doing the right thing in a series of moments. It had to do with finances, it had to do with freedom, it had to do with doing the best we could in the place that we found ourselves. So I'm not going to sit here and describe how you should be off-grid or without electricity necessarily, because I'm not sure that I believe that about your life. But I figure the least I can do is, having had these experiences myself, try to share some of the somewhat unusual lessons that they have taught me. I also need to take care of some housekeeping rather quickly. I want people to know where to find the various kinds of content that I create. I have a wide range as a teacher and a person who shares stories. So I want to be clear on what's going to be where and when, so that people can find what you are most interested in. My book launches December 13th. I am in my 6-week pre-launch period. I'm not terribly comfortable with the idea of a book launch. It sounds like a starship or something. But also I'm aware that in this time, I need to focus on that aspect of my identity. I'm going to be intentionally sharing my spirituality, my perspective on big things, and thoughtfulness and ideas. I'm going to be living in the world of ideas in between now and December 13th. Does that mean that the homestead wife identity is over and gone? Certainly not. Absolutely not. I've been thinking about my favorite things in the world about being a person on the internet. And besides having someone Instagram me a sketch that they've made, my other favorite thing is when people tell me that they've gained skills because of me. Or they've had the courage to gain skills because of something that I've shared. It's very emotional for me to help share skills, because for me, skills are freedom. Skills are the capacity to be your full self and to control your own destiny and to be caring and careful with resources and other creatures and other human beings. So it's a very deep and important thing for me to be able to share skills, which is why starting in January, I'm going to be doing a Homestead Wife Skill of the Month Club. So we will be doing cooking and canning and sewing, and I'll be bringing on some guests to do yarn arts, because although I enjoy yarn arts, I'm not an expert in that. We'll be working with fermenting and some basics of gardening and health and beauty. And I'll have it organized by month. I'll be doing some videos, and I'll also be creating some ebooks. I also want to tell you about the ebook that I wrote last month. So I told a few of you that I was writing an ebook. This one, according to my seasons, is about life in the woods. And it's called 20 Tiny Stories of the Woods. And it's a very spiritual, very searching account of moments in the woods and how that has affected my spiritual journey. Now, this ebook is a freemium. It's a freemium that goes to people who have pre-ordered my memoir, What Falls from the Sky. I'm going to put all that information below. You can comment if you have questions or contact me if you have questions. And for those of you who get that ebook, I hope that you enjoy it. I think it's really special. I've been working on it for quite a while. Which brings us to the story. This particular story takes place, as many of my stories do, during my first winter in the woods, as I was acclimating to so many differences, and among them, the lack of electric lighting. At my latitude, in the dead of winter, darkness would fall as early as 4:30, at least 5:30, before I intended to have dinner on the table and well before I intended to have kids in bed. On this particular night, though, that was not as much a concern because shortly after sunset, the moon had risen and it was a bright, almost full moon on a snowy landscape. At the kids' bedtime, I took Stella down to the outhouse and she said to me, "Mommy, is the moon on fire like the sun?" She was at this point 5 or 6 years old. I guess we had talked about that day the sun, and that the sun was a fiery ball of gas. And she wondered if the moon was also on fire. I said, "No, it's just reflecting the light of the sun." She said, "No, Mommy, the sun is gone. It can't be reflecting the light of the sun." And I said, "Oh, honey, no. The sun isn't gone. We just can't see it." Bless her, she took my word for it. And she and I both looked up at that bright moon, standing in our boots on white snow, in a lifestyle that seemed alone and somewhat infertile and somewhat dead. And we both felt that it was a true thing, a deep true thing, that the moon can see the sun. I'm a big believer in seasons. I am definitely one of these people who has received that experience of resurrection, of coming out of a very dark place and finding that I am okay again. That sort of miraculous feeling of rising out of a very hard place or a painful place or a broken place. But as someone who has had that experience, I also have the knowledge that you can't hold onto that. You can't hold it like a possession, because you're just as likely to have another fallow period, another desert period, another winter. If there's anything that living without electricity has taught me, it's that celestial bodies move in patterns. Is this news? Of course not. Of course, we all know that. But what does it mean to think that your life is patterned? What satisfaction, what reassurance there is to live a life that is patterned, and to know that when you fall into the quiet places, that's only a season. When you fall into the tired places, that's only a season. And when you reach certain peaks and accomplishments and feelings of success, that also is only a season. The first of the patterns that I became more in tune with, living a life without electricity, is that of the sun. The sun rises, the sun sets. The next day, the sun rises again, the sun sets. This is a pattern that's so familiar to us, we forget its existence. But we also resist it. We rebel against it. We extend the day in both directions. We force the edges of the day to fit more into it, to make it more and more and more of a productive time. In this era, we can sit up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning on our devices with not only light, but also communication, having daytime in the middle of the night. Is that a bad thing? I don't know that it's a bad thing, but I do think that there is a lesson to be learned from the absence of it, the experience of it. There's something about that magic of being patterned with the bodies in the sky, the sun and the moon. There's a magic to being patterned with them that's healing and restoring, that brings a person back to center. Sometimes I watch the public world around me and I think to be grounded or centered are verbs that we hardly even know the meaning of anymore. Things seem so crazy and wonky, and people are unsettled, and people are anxious, and people are afraid. And I wonder how much of those feelings, anxiety and fear, is related to actual events, and how much is related to not being calibrated to the clockmaker, the patterns of the clockmaker, the patterns of creation, the patterns of the world, the patterns of our environment. It's a funny thing about healing that it doesn't always feel like healing. A funny thing about recentering and coming to a health or groundedness, that it can also actually feel like losing everything. It can feel like a deep chaos and a tearing away. To return to a simplicity that connects you to these patterns of day and night and dawn and dusk can feel like having everything ripped away from you. It isn't until you've come around a little bit, look back at something over your shoulder, that you realize that when everything was being ripped away from you, you were being given your own feet back. And that when things fell out of your hands, you received your hands back. And that in fact, sometimes a loss restores the most important things: your identity, your capacity, your ability to be yourself and to survive. Our life now is so different from how it was that first year in the woods. We still are off the grid in the sense of off the power grid, but I'm pretty connected these days. And on top of that, we have neighbors. I'm hoping to be able to introduce you to them soon. There are children the same age as my children next door that my children can run over and play with or have over for a snack every day. What a difference from 3 years ago when we felt alone in these woods. I appreciate both of these experiences. I appreciate these seasons. I appreciate the reminder that nothing is forever, that darkness is not forever and light is not forever, that there is a pattern of darkness and light, which is not quite the same thing as a balance because it isn't still, but it's a true balance which is formed by contrasting things in motion. A lot of people around me right now are hurting. There's so much pain in people's individual lives. There is so much struggle in the moments of our days. Even in moments of great success and happiness, there is always struggle. There are always people who are experiencing loss or illness or separation. There are people who are experiencing financial difficulties and feelings of insecurity and feelings of fear and anger. If I could take this feeling of being patterned to the seasons and to the sky and bottle it and hand it out to people in little bottles, you know I would. It's an antidote to anxiety. It's an antidote to panic. It's a way of resolving our fears that the world is really never going to be all right again. Now, it is possibly true that certain things will come to an end, certain earthly things will come to an end. It's of course possible that there will be catastrophe, that there will be disaster. There are lots of reasons to think that our unsustainable systems may be problematic. There are lots of reasons to think about the possibility of disaster. But there's a humility and a security to be found in looking at our true things which are the sky and the sun and the moon and the regeneration of life through the soil. There is a capacity for health that's to be found in that deep level of faith that says the way that your mind carries you from one concern to another, it's not real. But it isn't the only thing that's real. There are also balancing forces of tremendous magnitude that you can lean up against, that can give you feet to stand on, that can give you inner strength. That night, after Stella and I had the conversation about how the moon can see the sun, I was lying in the dark and by myself because my husband was out of town, and I felt that kind of anxiety, the nerves of feeling that there might be a wild animal around the corner, that I might have made all the wrong choices with my life, that I might be doing something crazy that I might never be able to recover. I felt all those fears and all that anxiety, and I imagined, you could say I had a vision. I had a vision of the light passing from the sun to the moon, and how the sun is moving and how the moon is moving, and how that light bouncing back and forth makes a blanket around the earth, a blanket of light, a web of light. And I felt so reassured by that feeling of light passing all around me, even when all I can see is darkness. It seems to me a dark moment in my particular place and time, sitting here in these woods in the first week of November. There is some darkness in the world, and I don't want to hide from it, but I do want to offer the hope that the light is still there, and even if we can't see it, someone can. I'm Esther Emery. Thanks for hanging out with me this week. I'll see you next time.